Hi, Phil. How are you?
Hi, Tiffany. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Wonderful. How's your Friday going?
It's going well. It really is. Everything's going smoothly, and we're looking for the close of business date soon. So everything's going well. I hope the same for you.
Yes, yes. It's Friday. We're nearing the end of the day. I definitely am celebrating that. So, well, thank you so much for spending some time for me at the end of a Friday and a long week.
Always time for friends. I always make time for friends. My pleasure.
Yes, yes, a dear friend you are. Thanks. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and the amazing work you're doing in security?
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. First of all, thank you for having me. And my name is Phil Rizzo. I am the principal owner of Rizzo's Protective Group. We are a high-risk security consulting firm. We're headquartered out of Akron, Ohio. And we focus on security training, and we focus on three particular modules: active shooter risk mitigation, also a component called de-escalation of aggression, and then finally our third most popular module is something called tactical termination, where we work closely with HR professionals, HR departments, in order to assist them or team with them so that they can terminate an individual with tact. It's what we refer to it as, so that it reduces the likelihood of someone coming back to the facility with a weapon in order to commit acts of vengeance or violence. Um, I also am fortunate to serve as the Assistant Regional Vice President for the largest professional security organization in the world, which is ASIS, which stands for the American Society of Industrial Security. And I oversee the state of Ohio, which has chapters in Akron, Canton, Cleveland, and Columbus, which is the state capital.
Wow, that's a lot. And you teach too, right?
I do. I'm a criminal justice and forensic science instructor at a college preparatory academy in Warrensville Heights, Ohio. And we I teach my students all about the criminal justice system. We learn about forensic science and crime scene investigation, and I try my best to let them know what they need to know in order to be safe and in order to not be in the system, but to hopefully help them one day to work in the system if they decide to work in the criminal justice system as a judge, as a lawyer, as a law enforcement officer, a corrections officer. One of the many, many careers that the criminal justice field has to offer. I try to encourage and educate my students so that if they choose to go into criminal justice, that they'll be prepared and ready to do so. I love the teaching aspect that I do because, every opportunity we have with someone, Tiffany, is a teaching moment. We either are learning from someone or we're teaching something. And I really love that particular relationship where you can try to impart your knowledge that you've gained over the years to someone else to try to help them along the way.
I love that. That's another reason why we get along. I'm huge into mentorship and all of those things. Your class is very fortunate. I think I was joking with you recently and said I want to be a fly on the wall because these nice topics and interesting topics that you all are talking about. It has to be very interesting in that classroom, I'm sure.
Well, I think my students would be the best ones to answer that, but I know I know there's some days when there's some days when they probably don't really like Mr. Rizzo very much, but really my heart is in the right place, and when I have to let the students know that they're being too talkative and they're not focusing on what the mission of the day is. There's times when I have to say that. I'm not gonna lie and say that there aren't times when I have to remind them that they're there to learn and not there to socialize during class time. Um, but I know as I look around the classroom when I'm telling stories to my students, I know when I'm sharing stories of my career as an investigator in the past, I know it's funny to me, but I look out and I see a lot of the students just listening and listening and listening, and their mouths are wide open, like they're just like, and it makes me chuckle inside, but in another way, it lets me know that I'm on the right track with them because I'm making a connection with them in more ways than one. So that's what's important,
Yeah.
guide the youth in a way to where they can carry on and be strong and be independent on their own when it comes time.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, and I know when we first talked, I kind of came across your information on LinkedIn. We met on LinkedIn through another person's post who we have as a connection in common. And I said, let me scroll over here and see what Phil is all about, because I saw that you had a lot of knowledge to share. And ever since we've connected, we've just had these wonderful conversations, and I learned so much from you, and I'm so grateful. And part of the reason too, and we're going to talk about that today, that I wanted to connect with you today and even back then, was because HR and security professionals there's such alignment in what we do. And we both are responsible for keeping the workplace safe. Everyone is, but really it's just this wonderful partnership. And so I remember asking you a question around, well, what do you do if the police show up at the front door, they're in the lobby, and they show up to the workplace? Because in HR, I've witnessed people, myself included, when this happened the first time to me, like be super intimidated, like, all right, let me grab all the files and let me give them all the things. But you don't have to do all that. And so I wanted to get your perspective too on that. And kind of this came along with this article collaboration that we did a couple of weeks ago. And you broke it down and told us the difference between a subpoena and a warrant and all those things. So what are your thoughts about when the police show up at the door? What are some of those few key tips or a handful of tips that you would give people about what they should do and how they should conduct themselves?
Yeah, and I really enjoyed our collaboration that we put in together on that article.
Yeah.
This can be a really intimidating situation, when the police show up at your door. Typically, I mean, as you see a law enforcement officer, they have a gun and a badge, and those can easily be intimidating things. And we're not always thinking about what to do, and we don't always know what to do. So, I mean, our conversation on this is important because HR is tasked with so many things. You don't want to do the wrong thing. And we talked a little bit about that. You always want to labor to protect and insulate the corporate entity. You always have to protect the company from liability. But when the police show up, we got to remember that the police they're civil servants, and it's important for them to be civil in their civil service. That's a tongue twister. Say that.
Yes, I was like,
say that fast 5 times in a row. That'll get you.
no thanks.
But I would start by getting the officer's badge number. That would be the first thing. Jot it down because it's important to know. Also, of course, their name. You interact with people. You say, "Hi, my name's Phil," and you would get their name. I'm Officer Jackson or Officer whatever. And in this process, you have to document things. You have to, and HR people know that already. Document, because if it goes to court, if it's not documented, then it didn't happen. Okay, so you have to protect yourself at all times. That's kind of what a boxing referee, what his job is when he talks to the two combatants in the ring. He tells them, protect yourself at all times, no rabbit punching, no hitting below the belt. When I tell you to go to your corner, go to the corner I tell you to, and stay there until I tell you to come out. You got to protect yourself at all times. So as an HR professional, you got to do that. It's important to kind of know the law a little bit. So I would encourage HR people, HR professionals to take a little bit of time and research the law in your specific state. We got 50 states in the union. Every state you know, the laws differ a little bit, but pretty much there's laws on the books to cover pretty much anything we do. I mean, there's even laws on the books about crossing the street improperly, which is known as jaywalking, you know. So take a little bit of time, review the law that's applicable. Number one, make sure you know your HR policies and procedures handbook, you know. Get that big book off of the shelf, the
Take the
three ring
dust off.
bind, yeah, dust it off, and know what your company says about processes like this. And if you don't have policies and procedures on this, well, I'm sure you can assist with that as well,
Mhm.
part of what you do. And on the security side of it, you know, I can definitely work with any HR professional to help craft those policies and procedures. With Rizzo's protective group, that's part of what we do. Help crafting security policy and procedure so as to protect the corporate entity from liability. Um, and then it boils down to knowing the law. You know, you have to know about HIPAA, and every HR professional is well versed on that. Um, SHRM, you know, those are wonderful resources that can provide guidance for professional HR individuals on the law as it pertains to what you can divulge and what you cannot divulge. And we talked a little bit about, you know, information that you might find on a business card, you know, that kind of
Mhm.
information, that's information that can be shared. But information that's sensitive, that would harm the individual or expose them privately, if that information was shared, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, medical information, you know, those things, those are forbidden, you know, and the police have to respect. I talked one time with Bill Bratton. At the time, he was with the Los Angeles Police Department, commissioner of the department, and in his book as well, he says clearly something that's always stuck with me: police cannot break the law in order to enforce the law. So law enforcement, they have to follow the law, and there's steps that they have to follow as well. Um, so it's a give and take, you know. You want to, you know, in states, there's specific things that you cannot divulge without third party consent, according to HIPAA. So I mean, you have to be careful. You really do. In 2020, it is a minefield that you have to walk in and make sure you don't run afoul of the law, because not only can you expose yourself to liability, you can expose the company to liability. And so I would say know your role forward and backwards as an HR professional, and protect yourself at all times by knowing the law and by not being intimidated. You know, it is an intimidating situation, but the way you get over that intimidation is you work to stay calm. You work to have a clear and level head. You work to you know, not be hyperventilating when you're talking. You have to, and we joked about this before, you have to breathe from your core. That core breathing is essential in many things. Like, you know, I've never given birth. I'm a man, and I don't want to get off in the weeds, but you know, my wife, she's strong in a lot of areas, and core breathing, you know, that's essential. When a woman is giving birth, they have to do breathing to help with the pain, you know. And when you're in a stressful situation, you have to breathe your way through it, you know. So focusing, breathing, knowing what to do, those are crucial things to being a success in a situation like this.
That's so true. That's so true. I remember when it was the first time when the police showed up at the door, and the receptionist at the lobby called, and she was all in a panic, and you could hear she was almost at that hyperventilating state. And then I became that way, and we were feeding off of each other's emotions because we're like, we don't know what to do. The police are here. And we just thought automatically that we have to give over that deference, and because of their authority and they had a badge and they came in asking for stuff, well, they're the police. It's surely for a good reason, right? And they need this stuff. And so I went flying over to my colleague who was senior to me, and she was like, whoa, no, we're not just gonna, I'm like ready to like get the files. And she's like, no. And this happened multiple times over the years where I've had the police show up, or maybe it's the fire agency or FBI, and they want to talk to a supervisor even. And so there had to be pushback, because you can still have your own process and not have to give away all these things. So in our article, we talked about, don't go giving out the 70 years worth of files. You don't have to like go clean out the cabinets right away. And we say that half in jest, but that's kind of the situation that I was in when I was like, well, should I just have to do this? And then, once I learned that piece, then a new wrinkle came in. Oh, this person's here and they want to specifically talk to a supervisor. And people were like, no, we don't have to do that because that's not part of our regular process. So can you kind of speak to how the process works in terms of, do people have to have like a subpoena or a warrant, or are you allowed as an employer to have your own process?
Yeah, when a law enforcement officer shows up in your lobby, he or she had better have a subpoena for someone that they're looking for, because if they're just showing up there, wanting to ask questions, you don't have to answer the questions of the law enforcement. Now, I know my phone's gonna ring off the hook with my law enforcement friends who are gonna tell me, well, Rizzo, what are you doing to us here? But the fact of the matter is the Constitution applies to all people in the country, law enforcement including. Like I said earlier, you can't break the law to enforce the law. So, I mean, the law enforcement officer has to have a subpoena for an individual. Now, if he or she does have a subpoena, the company has to have processes in place, because you don't want to get into a situation to where you what's the word I'm looking for? To where you, for lack of a better word, ignore the subpoena. So in most cases, it's good to comply. And when I say most cases, I mean most cases. Unless you have a legal department that is ready and willing to fight to try to quash that subpoena or suppress that subpoena, you don't want to end up on the wrong side of a judge, okay? Because you can, and you most likely will, be held in contempt of court unless you have a legal processes to push back on a subpoena. So most of the times, if they show up with a subpoena, you will comply with a signed subpoena by a judge. But there's specifics in that subpoena that they can only request. And now there's a different type of subpoena, a subpoena duces tecum. Those are Latin words for you're required to show up and bring specific materials to that official hearing. And it specifies in the subpoena what a person is supposed to bring, if that's the case. So, I mean, depending on your facility, if you have a legal department, not every company has a legal department, you need to be prepared to comply with a subpoena if it is in your company's best interest to do so. And we talked about that. We talked about that specifically, that it's rare when you can ignore a subpoena. Unless you have, Johnny Cochran, rest in peace, or F. Lee Bailey, or a good lawyer on staff to try to quash that, it's best that you comply. But there's specific information that you don't have to give away information without that subpoena being there. Now, there was a situation where we had a subpoena for information and we complied, but we didn't give away all of the information that was requested. They wanted to actually grab the person and take them. And they didn't have the proper legal authority according to their paperwork to do it. So we asked them as a courtesy if they could try to grab the person off of company grounds, wait till the individual goes to their car, gets out of their car, gets in their car and drives away. Then they could pull them over or whatever. But don't do this on company grounds, because we don't want to get involved in this. So I mean, to your question, how's the process work? The police show up, they had better have their legal documents in order. They need to be tight and they need to be right.
We like to talk about tight and right. Tight
Yeah.
processes and get it right. We don't want to be on the wrong side of things and cause risk.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You want to protect the company from liability. You want to insulate the company from that always. So it's good to educate yourself on the process, like what we're doing here. Understand what a subpoena is, understand what the contents of a subpoena should be, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Basically the things that you would draft an article in the newspaper, if you saw an article in the New York Times or any newspaper. The author of the article wants to address the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Those are the basics, and that's what needs to appear in a subpoena. You need to know who is being subpoenaed, why, what the reason is, because you can't just grab people up off the streets. This isn't a sci-fi movie, or this isn't some country where that's permissible. We are governed by the Constitution, and therefore we have to comport ourselves in accordance with the laws that make up the Constitution. So I mean, remind me what some of your other aspects of that question was.
I think that's good. Just, and when you were talking about that, one of the things that I don't think that we shared, well, I know we didn't, in the article, but that's coming to mind as we're speaking, is just how these rumors can start flying in the workplace. And from an HR perspective, I know you agree too, from trying to contain something and de-escalate, it can be challenging. I've seen some difficult situations in the workplace, and it's so important to have this process, to take that breath, right? To know what the laws are, what your responsibilities and accountabilities are, so that it doesn't become this big scene like, oh, did you hear the police were, here? Or you need your employees to be engaged and productive, and you don't want to worry them.
Yeah.
I've had some situations. We had a person where they kind of went missing for some period of time, and we were like, whoa. But that's why you have to keep it as contained as possible, because you don't need to incite a bunch of panic. So thank you. I'm glad you started bringing that up, because it reminded me of that too.
Yeah, being discreet is important. I mean, in the security industry where I work every day, discretion is an important thing. If you're terminating an individual, you have to treat that individual with tact, because at the end of the day, they're human. They have a mortgage, a family, whether kids, whatever. You have to mitigate those issues that could push them over the edge. And when the police show up in your lobby, you want to be discreet. You don't want to get into a heated conversation back and forth. I mean, the basic things. You always treat someone with respect. I always call it CPR: courtesy, professionalism, and respect. And that's the way you would comport yourself with the law enforcement officer, and you would hope and pray that they would comport themselves in the same way. Sometimes, you have to keep in mind that if you disagree at any time with a law enforcement officer, they have the right to not be happy with you disagreeing or not complying with all of their requests. And that happens a lot of times. I mean, you see in interactions with the citizenry and police, if the police don't get their compliance full and complete immediately, well, then they're not trained well enough to know that you don't go for your service revolver immediately as the first default. You have to use de-escalation tactics. I tell my students that this here, your brain, is your biggest weapon as a law enforcement officer. it is your most effective weapon, that if you employ your brain and your thinking and your critical thinking capacity, you can de-escalate a lot of things to where you never would need to draw your 9mm service weapon or your taser. A lot of times, our law enforcement professionals, they don't think about that, you know. So as HR professionals in a situation like that, work to de-escalate, work to be professional always, because if you're professional, it makes it difficult for someone to be unprofessional with you. You know, I like to think that kindness begets kindness, and it should. It doesn't always,
True story.
but you know, if you throw a boomerang out, it typically should come back to you. Although you know, I'm not well versed with boomerangs or anything like that, but the concept. So if you start with kindness, you should be able to effectuate, you know, positivity with the law enforcement officer that's in front of you. But keep in mind that there can be disagreements, and you just have to maintain your professionalism and keep your cool and keep breathing. You know, you don't want to faint and fall in it. You know, and if things get heated, you can always call a timeout, just like in sports. Call a timeout, say, okay, wait, let's regroup here. Let's try to get on a better page. And you always have the right to call for a supervisor. I have called for when I've had conversations with law enforcement, and trust me, I will never be an individual who would say that all cops are bad. And I tell this to my students all the time. You will never get me to say that all police officers are bad. Never. There are some people who are law enforcement officers who need not be in law enforcement. They would be better served, and the community would be better served if they worked in other areas. But you have to deal with what's in front of you. And when you have an officer in front of you, you have to try to work the problem and not let the problem work you.
And the thing is, you know, they're trying to do a job, you're trying to do a job. They likely know they're going to meet some sort of resistance, whether that's a person or a process, right? And
Yeah.
I know that because I've seen this where there's been a little bit of a tussle, metaphorically speaking, where I didn't agree because I had to stand firm in what our organization's processes were, and they wanted to get what they needed to get. They're doing a job. If you take the emotions out of it, and you breathe from your core, as Phil is sharing with us here, and you remember that at the end of the day, you're both just trying to do a job, then that pretty much just sums it up, and it pretty much helps the process and can de-escalate some of those rumors and people hanging around to see what's going on. So I appreciate you sharing all these nuggets, these golden nuggets of your wisdom with us.
My pleasure.
Anything else you want to share that we maybe didn't cover from either the article or just that you're feeling Friday focused? I like to have Friday focus in my world over here at CEPHR. But do you have anything else you want to share with us?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. I would just say to our friends in the HR world that just take a little time and make sure you're well versed on the process, and always default to your company's HR manual, your processes and procedures, and just remember that you have this. This is your house, and you're in control. There's things that need to be followed in this process. And if you take a little bit of time to prepare ahead of time, because we always say in the crisis management, crisis management and disaster recovery fields, that the best time to prepare for an emergency is before one happens, not during or after. So to our people in HR, you have this. Should you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Tiffany is always available to help with your questions, and I'm always here to support in any way I can with security related questions as they relate to the HR process.
Yes, you've been an awesome person to collaborate with and to just share that wisdom. I'm just so grateful for you and this time that you took on this Friday. And before we go, I'm not going to let you off the hook before you talk about your podcast. We can find Phil on LinkedIn, and I'll put the rest of his contact information there, as well as a link to the article that we've been referring to. But really quickly, tell us about this podcast.
Mhm. My podcast is called Light 'em Up. It's on every major platform where you find your podcasts today. Too many of them to list. We focus on criminal justice, crime scene investigation, and leadership. And so far, it's been going surprisingly well. And I invite everyone to tune in. And I could share with you the specific links where you can find that. But pretty much, if you type in like Apple Podcasts, or if you type in like Spotify or any major, you can find us. It's called Light 'em Up with your host, me, Phil Rizzo. And I hope you'll listen, because we try our best to educate, enlighten, and inform. So that's
It's so good. I love listening. I usually get my coffee on like a Saturday or Sunday. Sometimes I get the rare treat that I'm able to listen during the week too, but it is great. It goes with your coffee, tea, all of your weekend things you would do normally. So definitely check it out. Phil and his guests are amazing. So thank you so much for spending some time with me. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll definitely talk soon because we stay connected. So I
absolutely
appreciate you.
my pleasure, Tiffany. So much a pleasure to spend time with you, and thanks for inviting me.
You're so welcome, Phil. Take care.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye bye.